Okay, welcome everyone to the free yoga and hypermobility webinar. In respect for your time, we're going to get started right away. The recording will go out. So if you missed the beginning, you'll be seeing this in the recording. And I'm going to let Catherine introduce herself first, and then I'll do my intro and we'll go from there.
Again, thank you everyone for taking time out to listen to us. For those of you who don't know me, I am a personal trainer living in the Bay Area and over in Oakland. I started, my background or bias, however you want to look at it, is I wanted to be an athletic trainer or physical therapist, do a bunch of rehab, because myself had lots of injuries. So I wanted to know how to fix those in other people. But when I was in grad school, started personal training and found it super rewarding. Really liked it, really liked the format of being with somebody over the long haul. I could really affect their life and their bodies, right? Make them healthier. So again, I just stayed with that, kept pushing off going to PT school, and I've just stayed with this for the duration. About 10 or 15 years ago, I noticed I would go to CECs, which is actually one of the places where we met Jules, doing our continuing education. And they always just said, wow, you move so amazing, so big, what big range you have. You must be great. I'm like, yeah, no, not so much. So definitely was getting injured a lot. And I noticed, yes, I have a lot more range than everybody else. I started looking, hypermobility spectrum disorder, EDS, Ehlers-Danlos, collagenous things going on, and started really relating to all of the symptoms and everything that these people were experiencing, I was experiencing as well. So that was, 10 or 15 years ago, going down that rabbit hole, and I've just keep going down the rabbit hole. I love it, and I love teaching people about it and creating the awareness, because it again, last few years, it's great. There's been a lot more awareness, but that's basically what I want to do, is teach you guys about it. And then probably about 95% of my clientele is hypermobile. So that's where we're at. This is what I do. So teaching you guys about
Thanks, Catherine.
So.
I'm Jules. I probably about half of you know me. I lead continuing education programs for yoga teachers. So while Catherine is a trainer, I'm more specific to yoga, and I run my own 300-hour yoga teacher training. And Catherine is a member of my guest faculty, leading a section on hypermobility. I wrote this book, which is Yoga Biomechanics, Stretching Redefined, and it really leans heavy into the tissue mechanics side of biomechanics. And if you don't know what tissue mechanics is, it's like the mechanical properties of collagen-based connective tissue, like their structure, composition, behavior, and really how it all affects stretching, safety, injury, function, and pain. Since hypermobility is generally classified as a connective tissue issue, and we're going to get into that today, hypermobility is a topic that comes up a lot in my trainings and in my own research and writing. So I'm teamed up with Kat, and we are together trying to raise awareness, not just about hypermobility, but specifically how to work with hypermobile students in your yoga classes. And that's what this free webinar is really going to focus on. We're not going to overload you with research, which some of you are probably here because I'm known for that. But
the course.
Okay. You can get that in the course, exactly. We're here to just kind of give you some hands-on tools that you can take into your classes today at the end of the webinar. If I can leave you with one little reminder before we get into it, it's that as Catherine goes through the upcoming slides on the tissue side of things, really think of like normal rules of adaptation apply. Like that's something you can write down and right now, normal rules of adaptation apply. And you can kind of hold on to that as we go through all of this. On the personal side of things, working with the person, not with the connective tissue, but with the person who has hypermobility, it's more complicated, nuanced, and delicate. And that's why we're here today. So
that's what I work with every day on the daily.
Yep.
So why are we here? I especially think it's important to learn about, and I love that Jules has a hypermobility section in her yoga teacher training, because they say about 10 to 15% of the population, greater population, might have a certain degree of hypermobility. In your classes, because of those positions, it asks for a pretty great range of motion for your asanas. There might be a few more. It self-selects for these very Gumby folks, okay? So there's a lot of them in your class. Again, I work with a population that's very symptomatic. So most of my people have they just are getting injured and get flared up when they go to yoga class. So they're like, no, bye-bye, peace out. So hopefully maybe you can try to implement some things or just modifications during a regular class. Be like, hey, actually take this block and do it this way. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about a lot today. And then, of course, you're here to...
Yes, we will at the end of this, because it's a free webinar, we will choose a winner for the full-length free course. So that is part of why we're here.
Yeah.
Thanks for showing up, everyone.
It's very good.
Yeah.
The goals today is really to show how Jules and I, like, the why behind why we're doing these pose modifications, illustrating what our reasoning is of why we put somebody with a tubing going from their feet to their hands, right? And we want to make it easier for you to pick and choose your whole class, or even just within a pose itself, of how to really curate, again, either a whole class or just a few modifications or a few little series that you want to put together during your class, and feel confident in doing it, knowing why you're doing the things you're doing. Okay. So when we did this, we're like, we should have a definition of this hypermobility spectrum disorder.
Yes.
We're not going over the full nitty-gritty of this. This is sort of my elevator speech or your cocktail hour. What do I do? I have to say this all the time. What do I do? Right. And so I specialize in this population. What's that population? So this is usually how I describe it, that they are people with just greater than average joint range. They're your Gumby folks, but it's not always. People with HSD can also not be super Gumby. We talk a lot about that in the course. So they can be lax and be fine. They can be totally asymptomatic. But this increased laxity can also be due to a genetic collagenous disorder. It is inherited from your parents. The integrity of your collagen is a little compromised, but collagen is everywhere. So not only do you get musculoskeletal injuries that you would think of would be, expected, you're going to possibly have systemic issues in your GI tract, vascular, skin, and nervous. And a lot of you who have heard about this have probably heard that there's a lot of these comorbidities, a ton of other symptoms that people experience. Okay, so that's sort of your very simplified version of this. This is sort of
that's a good definition to have, I think. Just let me interrupt with that, because as someone who writes a lot about definitions, there are, it's important to understand the technical definitions that you find in the research, but those don't always align, and those words don't always align with the way we use words colloquially. So, I think it's really good to practice talking about hypermobility in a general public sort of way so that people can understand it without it sounding like you're medicalizing it.
Yeah, completely. And there's a huge evolution in how this is being looked at, because there was a dearth of research. It's getting better. It's been, they've done the reclassification of the diagnostic criteria. That was in 2017. So it just keeps changing and changing. So even this little graphic right here, this was in 2023. I'm like, oh, okay, this is how we're looking at it now. This is the nomenclature we're using. I'm like, that's different than that other research paper. So when you look at the papers, the terminology it can be a little confusing, but this is how they're kind of looking at it right now. And the important thing today is just to see that the guys over here on the right, these are sort of what I deal with. But again, in that 15 to 20% of the population, this might only be like 5%. So again, you can be Gumby and be fine, right? When, Jules and I talk about collagen, we say that these folks over here might have a variant of collagen, not necessarily disordered, but it might be a little more stretchy that creates the laxity. But again, a lot of different things create joint range in your bodies. So this is sort of how the research folks are looking at this right now. But the spectrum is the most important because huge variation in how these people present across the population. But even within day-to-day variation, I can have people, you might have a client who comes in, student, someday they want to do a power yoga, I'm feeling amazing on top of the world. The next day, not so much. Somatics, restoration poses for that day. You're always having to modify and meet them where they're at day to day. Okay, so that spectrum is within the whole, but also even within the day to day within that person themselves. So,
and just before we go on, I popped into the chat the PubMed link to the 2017 classifications from the spectrum slide, so everyone can look at that.
Brilliant.
If you're interested. Hopefully the newer one will come out soon. But like Catherine said, everything is changing all the time in the research. So that's the most recent formal classification that we have.
Yes, yeah. There's been a lot of recent research, so it's been good.
Yes, yes.
So one of the topics that we look at in the course, we go a lot into in depth with a lot of these things, with breathing specifically. I think this was Jules's favorite portion.
Yeah, it is.
So in yoga, of course, pranayama is part of yoga. You sort of futz with breathing, right? You breathe through your mouth, you breathe through your nose, you alternate nostril breathing, you make it faster, make it slower to affect the body, which it does. Breathing is sort of the jackknife multiple tool, I think, it could, because it does so many things, which is why I really love utilizing it.
Yeah. So if we let's talk about the little pyramid, and then I'll let you talk about your section.
Yeah, in the course, we look a lot at the breathing mechanics, and that breathing practice pyramid is what Jules.
So this is a handout that we use in my training, but I just want you to take a look at it. That, you know, there's stages of breathing, and what I think is really interesting in yoga is we tend to default to the top of the pyramid. So if you look, it says breath awareness on the bottom, and a lot of your students are going to start with that. And then once they are aware of their breath, then we can move on to observation and movement quality. And that can be really complex for some people. And then we can move beyond that and go into direction and imagery, like where can you direct the breath? Again, that can be challenging for some people. And then on top, I would put like simple pranayama practices and complex pranayama practices. So we really focused on this class on the bottom three, you know, really trying to emphasize direction and imagery. And that's where the breathing mechanics comes in. So go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, and we talk again, the mechanics. What are your basic? What's the breathing muscle? Is the diaphragm. So the position of the diaphragm, and you can manipulate that. What position sort of doesn't facilitate breathing? Some folks might find being in a big extended position. So we look at these positions. You can even right now, you can just bring your arms back behind you. Bring your chest up. Do you breathe easier? Or is that more difficult? Bring your arms forward, kind of round forward. Does that feel easier or harder? So playing with, like, that's what we played a lot with in the course, a lot with direction and imagery. But again, first, just go into the position. Is it easier? Is it harder? And we talk a lot about what, you know, where the diaphragm needs to be, that 360 breathing. This picture right here was brilliant. I loved this one. I'd done this before. Jules took the balls, and then you really had, again, these props of the balls. You breathe, and the side will just, your arm just like floats up. It's like, right? So the ball came up, the arm comes up. It's brilliant.
And what I really like about that lateral breathing practice with the balls are put into the chat. You can also use foam blocks if you don't have those little squishy balls. But it really helps you identify if you're someone who has breathing mechanics that default to like neck and upper shoulder breathing, which can become painful and symptomatic for some people. And so some of the simple little breathing practices using like direction, again, not complicated pranayama where you're holding your breath and you know, that kind of stuff, but you're really just observing the movement quality of the breath can really help somebody identify strategies that aren't useful for them, that they might not know they have. So
you might find breathing into a certain area can then affect joints And then we get to them so that they are a little happier, and their niggling shoulder stops niggling them. So they realize, oh, wow, I only used breath. I just breathed in a certain way, and someone's neck felt better. I have that on the daily probably. So this, right, we use these balls. This isn't how you'd usually use them in your yoga practice, right? No. So we use a lot of the props, but not usually in the way you would use them in the traditional sense, right? Because again, we are trying to affect this certain population. They lack a lot of tension. They don't necessarily love shear and pulling of their joints. So we want to bolster that, push, put things underneath them maybe to shore up a joint. This tubing around from my foot to my hip is creating compression along that whole line, bringing it together. Then I don't have to work to hold those bones together as much, because they're a lot lax than somebody else. My knee just sort of goes, does a lot of fun things. So if I bring that together, it makes the rest of the movement a lot nicer, a lot easier. I kind of float up. But again, I would say this will be effective for some people. I try this with others and they're like, yeah, maybe, right? Everybody is this special snowflake, okay? That you have to figure out what are the things that are effective for them. So it sometimes takes some time. And in this one, we put this picture and I'm like, yeah, I think I need a lot more references than just this bolster, right?
Yes. So if you are watching in the chat, why don't you take a look at that photo of Catherine? That's from our original course. That's a screenshot. But how else would you support her creatively using props to reduce shear? Go back to the last slide for a second, just because there were a few other things on there. So create external lines of tension, reduce shear, increase proprioception, or promote muscle engagement or coordination. So go forward again so they can see that. Yeah. So I would love to hear from you. So we know you're still there.
Right. Are you awake?
Yeah, nice, Carrie. Carrie has a good one. Yeah, use a rubber band around the lifted foot, holding it in either hand. Use a wall. Awesome, yep. Gina. Yep. My attention went to her ankle on the bottom. So this is where, like on the last slide, we also have just like standard props, but then we had these unusual props. There was a photo of a washcloth. I took like a Ross and bought like a pack of 12 washcloths for like $5. And they're one of my favorite props. I would just roll something like that up and place it under her ankle there. Yep. I have about 1850 rally towels. You get those free. Yeah. Yeah. And then we were chatting about this. I thought, oh, maybe if the neck needs some support and you don't have access to a wall, you might consider putting the top hand behind the head so the head can rest in it. But then the shoulder might not like that. So it's really a game of like, you might have to give up one thing to get another. And you really have to listen to the student and what their needs are for the day. Yeah. And it depends. That totally might work for someone and they'll be like, oh yes, I'm completely supported. And their own hand sort of, that gives proprioception and feedback. Using your hands just on your limbs and on yourself is helpful for proprioception. So it's a good way to use. But yeah, if I had someone with a shoulder stuff, neck stuff, I wouldn't do that. So again, very specific to who you're dealing with. Okay. So range, this is contentious. But yes, it is. Right. In terms of this, again, Jules, physics, biomechanics, that's sort of the language that we speak. And this position, if I just stood on and went into my hyperextension in my knee that my knee likes to do, I'm just hanging on bones and I don't have to use much muscular activity. It's like a Jenga. My body, I just like, okay, I balance on these two bones. If I bend this, I have to contract my muscles. So in general, when you decrease the range, little bend in those joints, you're going to have just basically in general, more muscular activity going on. When you do that, you're going to have more pull on those tendons, which can increase mechanoreception, right? So that increases proprioception. You're usually better able to go contract. In general, I would say it's less risky, but we don't have the research out there. Also just greater force production. Yeah, you go back to the length tension curve, if you're familiar with what that is. Basically, muscles have a curve, like kind of a bell type curve, not exactly, but a dome. And at short range and at long range, they don't produce as much force as easily as in the mid range. So that's one of the things that you can do here, is just kind of shorten the range so the muscle can contract. And then also, just if you're on a standing leg and you bend a joint, now all of a sudden you're interacting with gravity in a different way, and to hold yourself up, you'll need to engage. So it's always dependent on the person and the position relative to gravity, but something to consider.
Yeah, it's always what is the
not
goal?
What I would like to say is our message is not about just bending the knee or the elbow, because I think that's what gets lost in translation in yoga trainings. It's like, well, just do a micro bend and you'll be fine. It's the micro bend that leads to greater co-contraction of the muscle. Just doing a micro bend on its own, like they used to believe that would increase joint friction and create osteoarthritis. And that's what Catherine was talking about. Like, we don't necessarily have the research for that. But when somebody is able to produce tension with their muscles, they have increased proprioception and they feel more stable. And that's what you want to do for your yoga students.
For sure. And this is just an example of very classic, right? Down dog, up dog. You can do the stuff on the left. It's fine. It's just different, right? I am just wanting to create, for most of my clients, I'm wanting to create strengthening of this whole front line. When I'm in this sort of shortened position, I can pull the mat together instead of the mat in this position. She is most likely, this mat is being pulled apart. So we want to sort of create together compression, tension, all the things we've been talking about. And I just bring my heel just off, right? I get a lot of activation in the calf muscles. Everything is sort of turned on. Again, I'm not hanging out on my hyperextending elbows. So those are all nice, wonderful things. Again, for some people, if that's what I want from them, okay. Most of my people have a lot of cervical instability, so they don't love that position, okay? So I'm just gonna keep that neutral or fairly neutral. Okay, again, just not going, and then if people have back issues and they don't love, some of my people, they like this position for the back. So again, it depends. Okay. In terms of how
it's just good practice to look at these two poses, the left and the right, and see them both as different but equal. I think we've all been so conditioned that this is the way the pose looks. But it's really like, what do you want to do in the pose? What feedback do you want? And, what sensation experience do you want your person to have? So they're both good.
Yeah. And I used to love hanging out in these positions. I don't so much anymore. So sometimes every once in a while, just depends on the day, right? A day-to-day variation. Yeah. Okay. So I couldn't do something without talking about weights. I could go on, but I think the biggest take home with weights and muscles, right? They have an issue with, some of the folks have an issue with the collagen. If you have blown through the ligaments and you don't have much holding a joint together, the muscles are the tissue that you can have the most control over. I can increase the cells. I can increase the size of them. I can do a lot to a muscle. So that's control. Yay. And you can do that by weights, and it supports these areas where, she brings her arm up and that shoulder, that humerus might pop out the back. So let's get some muscles around where those ligaments might have done that. So get those muscles nice and strong. Not only there, the whole thing, right? It's back and front that she's unstable. So stabilizing proximally, stabilizing the shoulder joints, the hip joints, and then strengthen globally. Right now, there's a lot of programs like subscriptions for programs. That's where a lot of trainers are doing. I would just be a little wary with the programs. You can maybe try to contact them and be like, can I get a 6 week? So they're usually in 4 to 5 week blocks. Try to find somebody that knows that you might be on a 6 to 8 week block. You go very slowly. We heal slower, we grow slower for the folks who have EDS. So it's just, you have to do it wisely. Again, find a good trainer if you can. Okay. So doing the weights, getting the muscles strong is the big thing.
If you don't have weights because you're teaching a yoga class, then use your props again, in a creative way. So, like we've always been told, oh, a strap lengthens your arm or whatever. Well, it can also be an immovable object that you're trying to overcome. So you could use it to help with it overcoming isometric contraction. So again, if you want to sense the posterior shoulder, sense the small shoulder muscles, instead of making every pose stretchy, you can, pull on a strap or squeeze on a block or, do pull the mat together. There's so many opportunities to create resistance with a yoga prop.
Yeah, that sort of sneaky strength. If you have those people who just don't, they're not going to go into a weight room, you can at least try to do some of this, and you'll get a little load, not the load of a 50-pound weight, but it's still,
you'll get
it will
something.
have some effect.
And actually, what I think is most useful for if you're going to do it in these terms of isometrics is because you're not moving in an isometric, it really increases that co-contraction and that sense of stability. And it might lead someone to believe that they could then start doing weights. Somebody who might be, like not have the confidence and not feel very secure or feel very stable. So it could be a really good like entry into that.
Yep. An intro to it where they are fine.
Yeah.
This is the one that
now the stuff.
Right. This is the one that I found to be, I was like, wow, or enlightening for myself, because I hadn't been doing these as much. And we had to video these and I used them and I'm like, oh, wow, I would put myself in this position. And I was so amazed at how quickly it dropped into relaxation. And because we love doing research, I then researched all this stuff, and it does, like using the weights on specific pressure points of your hands and your eyes and your feet. It does this quick drop into this parasympathetic nervous system, which if you can do that, two of the biggest symptoms for these folks is fatigue and pain. Like 85 to 90% of your symptomatic hypermobility deal with fatigue and pain. What is helpful for those? Being more on the side of the parasympathetic nervous system. So it facilitates restoration, rebuilding, all of the things that are hugely, hugely important for this population. So I found I'm definitely using these a lot more.
Do you want to talk for a bit on that last slide, go back on why you're like pseudo sideline? I think that would be a useful tip for teaching.
Yeah. So I have a lot of folks, again, most of my folks have a lot of shoulder issues. So it's this sort of pseudo, you kind of like fake sideline by sort of more rotating in the lumbar, right? So my legs are over on the side, but I just sort of boop, like just a little bit on the side here. And then I wrapped the blanket so it was being held and supported. So that is the huge thing. You just need to be supported. We need to be swaddled such that when we relax, we don't slide and creep into everything, right? We're sort of like amoebas. We just like the blob. And even if we get comfortable in one position, that creep will occur and we'll just sort of we just keep moving. So you have to bolster yourself up, connect yourself with belts and blankets, right? Here, I have this weighted blanket holding my arms. This is holding my feet together. In another one we did, my legs were literally held together with the belt, which actually feels amazing. Because we're so used to our legs just flopping over. It's so nice to be able to like relax and our legs just stop. It's quite wonderful.
And I think even in the course when we talked about this one, you said in the worst case scenario, when there's no like sandbag for the hands or some weighted cushion for the hands, you can even just put your hands in your yoga pant waistline, and that would even do something.
It worked. I mean, they're literally called compression pants now. So like they compress. Those are really tight pants that everybody's wearing. Like use them, right?
Yeah.
And we did also talk the other day. I was saying you can use this, right? We're used to using this at the end of a class. I'm not teaching yoga, but with a client, I usually, right, you'd say cool down. I used this at the beginning because she was so ramped up into sympathetic. She was just crying, agitated, anxious. She was just a mess. I started with this. She actually had a weighted blanket. I was like, go get your weight blanket, this. She thought it was crazy. So to get all this stuff, laid her down, 5 minutes, she did this, rolled around. In 10 minutes, she was like, okay, yeah, let's get going with the weights. And we got a whole session in and she felt amazing. So you wouldn't think to use this at the beginning, but that's, again, you got to go with do what's right for that person at that right time. So
yeah, and we show in the course, we show like a bunch of techniques on how to fold these blankets to cushion the sacrum, to wrap the foot, to do like a spa pillow around the head, because they can, you know, I mean, you can always just shove things under, and then there's the art of folding props.
that's what we do in the course. You get that with the course. So, right. So thank you so much for hanging out with us for this, giving you little tips and strategies. Hopefully you found it helpful.
I think it's the time for a little Q&A, since we rushed through it really quickly, which is great.
Yeah, we did. My gosh.
We have, before we announce the winner, Gina and Donna are lovely moderators. They're graduates of my 300 hour. Are there any questions that have come up that are worth addressing? Gina?
Yes.
Don?
Yeah, I'm here. I was typing in the other stuff. Okay, so there is, the first question is, how does breathing benefit specifically a hypermobile person?
How does breathing specifically benefit? Well, you go back to the breathing slide, and I'll just answer it within a yoga context, because that's a very general question.
Yeah.
And then you can get a little more specific if you want. Go forward one. Two. Yeah. Okay. So for example, you know, in yoga, in a sun salutation, we're always told, inhale, bring your arms up. That's just like the general cue. Okay. So you could, let's just say somebody does that, their shoulders feel cranky, their neck feels cranky, their back feels cranky, because the inhalation in that gesture will kind of push all the air forward into the chest. So if you want to play with a different type of breathing, like here we gave the example where I'm doing lateral breathing, but you could do posterior breathing. So you could say, you know, try to like breathe into the back as you bring your arms up to push the air back. And all of a sudden they won't have this big back bend. The shoulders might feel more supported. So you're playing with pressure. Or you could say, exhale on the arm, bringing the arms up, and that the exhale brings the ribs down, and that might create some pressure that would change the sensation. So there is no like one, like this is the breath practice that helps someone with hypermobility. There's, in the yoga class, these are the options of directed breathing and breathing observation. This is the shape of the pose. This is where the complaint is. How can I manipulate the breathing to support them in the pose? That would be my answer.
Yeah. There are a billion ways how it helps hypermobiles. One of the things is if you work on those mechanics and get their breathing more efficient and effective, they often will just, they breathe easier, usually start to slow down that breath rate, which we all hopefully know. If you have a slower breath rate, Western is 12 to 15 breaths per minute. The indication of a balanced nervous system is 5 to 6 breaths a minute. If we get anything you can do to slow down your breath rate and get a more effective breathing, they will then be more in that parasympathetic and be out of that sympathetic. Again, we didn't talk about it. Most of these guys have a lot of anxiety and are very ramped up. So that getting better breathing, because a lot of them breathe, right? With these, you see these sternocleidos, scalenes. This is how they breathe. Like, take a breath. Okay. Shoulders come up. It's not a super effective way of breathing. And many of my clients, that is how they start breathing. So I work on mechanics, and then they're like, okay. And then there's a lot of different things that we talk about in the course of how this better mechanics of breathing can then affect all the joints around and creating pressure. I'm just using, it's a bag of volume air. We go into a lot of depth into that in the course.
Yeah.
How this helps.
Go to the next slide with the pyramid, and then Gina will take the next question. But just here, even, as yoga teachers, you probably know this, but even just helping someone bring awareness to the breath, even if the direction, the imagery is challenging, will automatically have them pay attention to it and slow it down. And so that even if you can do that, if that's all you can do, that's excellent. And that's why I think sometimes the complex pranayama practices, they actually like sometimes increase the heart rate, and they increase anxiety because you're holding your breath out, you're holding your breath in. Those are very complex practices. They're great practices, but for this population, just even breathing is a great place to start. If you take one thing from this free webinar, it's that.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, Gina, what's the next question?
Okay, so we had a nice summary. The essential message here is that a hypermobile person needs to learn how to create tension, engagement, and ultimately develop muscular strength. And in this way, shift away from laxity and towards control. And then there was a follow-up, the same person. They understand that mobility is an emergent property, including muscular, articular, and neurological factors. Mostly, they are seeing muscular solutions, but wondering if we can pull back from end range laxity using other types of solutions, maybe increase sympathetic tone to generate more containment. Crazy, I know. That was the whole thing.
There was a lot there. I'm going to just go back to the first thing I said in the beginning, when I said the normal rules of adaptation apply. So if we're looking at like the weights, will you go to that slide, Catherine, the weights and the isometric, overcoming isometric, Catherine really focused on muscle tension, being able to produce muscle tension, which is super important. Go back one to the x-rays. Yeah. The idea, the theory, because we don't have research on connective tissue adaptation for hypermobile populations, but if you look at the histology, the connective tissue is the same, it just has a different structure. And of course, so the behavior, some of the chemical behaviors are a little bit different, and there's research coming out on that. But until we have information otherwise, we will say that normal adaptation applies. It's just, think of it, instead of, if you've got stiff stabilizing connective tissue, and and then you have a hypermobile person who's down here, and they have less stiff or compliant or lax, whatever word you want to use. If they train, they will go, they both train, they will both go up, but this one might never go up here. It might never, pass. But so that's the theory we're operating on, is that we're using the muscle introducing external load to grow the muscle, use the muscle, and then ideally it would also help the connective tissue to some degree. Yeah. Catherine?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, it sounded like they were saying like, oh, the laxity at the end, like circus performance and people who have to go, like perform at those ranges, they have to go into those ranges. So they are trying to create contraction and trying to create tension at those ranges. Jen Crane works a ton with those folks with Cirque du Soleil. So I don't want to demonize going to those end ranges. We don't have the research. There has been, again, it's an N of like 4 of looking at a tendon and what happens to it when you strength train. They have seen, okay, it doesn't act possibly exactly like a normal collagenous person, but it does, you do build, right? So it does have the effect of strengthening.
Which is hopeful. That's the whole point we want here, is we want to give a message of hopeful and empowerment and confidence and like the nuance and the allowance that every day is going to be different, that yesterday was great, today might not be, and that's okay. We just, modify and adapt.
Yeah. And I also theorize it's an interesting, and again, there's not research on this, but because we have less tone and tension, right? So if I sit up, I have to use a lot more musculature to hold myself up. When we lift a weight, I almost contend that we are lifting actually more weight because the muscle has to work so hard than a normal person. So it's sort of it's just a very different body in terms of where tension is. There's just not much of it. It's interesting when you think about it.
And then there was one more that came through. If you,
let's do it real quick, and then we'll go to the last slide.
they stated that they never knew anxiety or considered anxiety to be a symptom of hypermobility and are wondering how that works.
Yeah,
I
we
think
go
we kind of answered that, but in the breathing part, we already answered it a little bit, I think, just now.
Yeah, there's a lot of the collagenous stuff. There's a lot of effects that are occurring. Like we literally need to maybe vasoconstrict. Our blood pressure's not very high, so we have to vasoconstrict. In order to do that, you pump out some adrenaline. That's one of the factors that increases anxiety. Just one of the
Yep.
a
And
lot of factors.
increased breath rate, increased heart rate. Yep.
There's so many
Vasodilation.
things that are creating anxiety and sort of promote anxiety in these individuals. So yeah, anxiety, panic disorder is very common in this population. But there's a lot
And
of
just socially, like, what is wrong with me? Why do I feel like this? Why am I so tired? Like, that can also contribute to it.
all of it. Dysautonomia, proprioception, not knowing where you are in space, all the things. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good one. Good one.
I'm glad that this is new information for some of you. That posted it in here. It's Stephanie's. Oh gosh, that is a name I can't pronounce. Gerolimato. Is it a soft G or a hard G? I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, that's the winner. So contact me in order to get access to the course. And then what we're going to do moving forward is talk about the course a little bit if you're interested. So go ahead, Catherine.